Well, welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Tanner Bryan. I'm a senior partner here at Action Coach in Central Texas. Excited to be sitting down with my guest today, Mike McKim, who is the founder and CEO of Cuvée Coffee here in the Austin market. So excited to just be jumping in, having some conversation about, I don't know, business, entrepreneurship, this crazy, roller coaster of a ride that, tends to be business these days, and just kind of learn some lessons along the way. So, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Let's just start with a little bit of background. For those that have not heard of Cuvée Coffee, why don't you give us kind of a quick peek into what you all do, and then we'll
Sure.
kind of talk a little bit about your background and how this all got started.
Absolutely. Yeah. First off, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Um, so Cuvée Coffee, we're a coffee company, obviously, but the name dictates that. We're a coffee roaster. We're also a manufacturer of cold brew coffee. We're the inventor of Nitro Cold Brew. And I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit later. But we roast coffee, and we take it and extract it and make cold brew out of it and keg it and can it. And we also have a bar in the downtown area right off Rainy Street, where we serve coffee products, cocktails, and coffee-centric cocktails and things like that.
Very cool. So
Yeah.
what was the genesis of this? How did you get into the coffee world? I was reading a little bit about your background before we jumped on here today, but give us a little sneak peek into what led up to starting the company and just a little bit of your background.
Yeah. It is like most coffee people I know, I completely backed into it. I had no interest in getting into coffee. I didn't really know what the coffee industry was. Um, I was snow skiing out in Tahoe, and I went to visit an uncle of mine who owns his own business, and I always wanted to be an entrepreneur and that sort of thing. And he makes food analyzation equipment. I went to visit him in Reno, and he was making this analyzer for coffee that measures the degree of roast of coffee. And so he's walking me through that process. And then he said, "Hey, have you ever seen coffee being roasted before?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, come on back here." And we go into his warehouse, and he's got a little coffee roaster set up there. And we roast a batch of coffee together. I was with a buddy of mine, Patrick, at the time. And we were like, "This is really cool." We were like, "Can we roast more coffee?" He was like, "Sure. Here's how you do it. And here's the programming settings." And so instead of going snow skiing that day, we roasted coffee. And that was it, man. I got bit by the bug, and I was incredibly passionate about the art of roasting or the craft of roasting coffee.
Hmm. That is I love that. That it's such a kind of a fun story. So how long ago was that when you kind of got into that piece, and then did the business kind of start shortly thereafter? Was there a little bit of transition, kind of learning more about it before starting the business, and kind
Yeah,
of how did that come about?
that's a great question. That was in 1998. And then, yes, so Patrick and we said, "Man, this is awesome. Hey, Carl, where do we get a coffee roaster?" And he said, "Well, I'm actually selling this one because I need a bigger one for my coffee business." And so we bought this commercial coffee roaster, that roasts 20 to 25 pounds of coffee at a time. We shipped it back to Dallas and set it up in my buddy's warehouse, or my buddy's dad's warehouse. We used to work for his dad in the telecom industry. And then we just started roasting coffee as a hobby. Problem was, we're roasting 20 pounds of coffee at a time because of the size of the roaster, way more than we can consume on our own. So we started selling to friends and family and that sort of thing. And you know, so I'm standing in a friend of mine's brewery right now, and the analogy that I make is, it's like every craft brewery owner you've ever met. They start brewing beer in their basement or their garage or whatever, and then they're giving the beer to their friends and family. And then one day, everybody's like, "Your beer is so amazing!" Like, "Oh, just open a brewery." And it's exactly the same thing for coffee. We were like, "Well, let's open a coffee business or a coffee roasting company." That's what we did back in '98.
Man, I love that so much. It's such a organic kind of story and how that unfolds and all
Yeah.
that. So, um, been in it clearly a number of years. Business has grown over time. I'm always curious on, from kind of those early days and roasting the coffee and doing all the things in the business to kind of where you're at today. What does your role look like in the company today, and how maybe walk us through a little bit on how that's changed, over the last couple of decades?
You know, to answer that question, which will actually answer the second part of your first question, is, you know, we were both in the telecom industry, which was really good in, you know, the late 90s until the whole dot-com bubble happened. And, you know, all the internet companies tanked and that implosion. And my buddy was like, well, I want to keep food on the table for my family, so I'm going to get another job in the telecom industry. And I was like, you know what? I hate this industry. I hate my job, so I'm going to roast coffee. So we parted ways, and I was roasting coffee in my garage and just basically pounding the pavement, trying to sell coffee to people. And you know, since this is a more of a business focused entrepreneurial podcast, I always like to throw this tidbit in. For 10 months, so we were roasting what was classified as specialty coffee back then, right? And we were the first coffee roaster in Texas to do that. Everything else was, you know, lower quality, less expensive coffee. My uncle said, whatever you do, buy higher quality coffee. It's going to cost you more, but people will notice the difference in taste. I said, okay, great. So I'm going around. I was in Houston, Texas at that time, and I'm working my way into the door of restaurants and coffee shops, which there weren't that many coffee shops back then, and saying, just taste my coffee. And so we'd sit down and we'd taste their coffee, my coffee, and they were like, man, yeah, your coffee is way better, but it's 50 cents a pound more than what I'm buying. So I can't do it. So it's fantastically unsuccessful. So for 10 months, I'm trying to build this business and I had zero income. Month 10, we had a brand new baby, and my wife said, hey, when I put Connor to sleep, we need to sit down and talk. I said, okay. So she puts Connor to bed that night. We sit down at the kitchen table and she looks me in the eye and says, we have enough money to pay bills one more month and then we're broke. So I had a mortgage, I had a brand new baby, no job, no income, just a dream. So I'm like, okay, well, this kind of sucks. But I get up the next morning and I go visit a coffee shop downtown. And through a series of events, the guy that was working there that day was opening his own coffee shop. And he said, I need to buy an espresso machine. Can you help me with that? And I said, sure, I can help you with that. And I had no idea how I was going to help him with that. But I called the company that he wanted to buy the espresso machine from. It's called La Marzocco. And luckily, my uncle, who had introduced me to coffee, introduced me to the president of La Marzocco at one point. So I said, hey, Joe, this is Mike, you know, Carl's nephew. I'm going to buy an espresso machine from you. And he says, okay, that's cool. Do me a favor. We'll sell you an espresso machine, but don't call me anymore. We're hiring a regional manager. She'll be based in Atlanta, and you'll work with her from now on. And I said, okay, have you hired her yet? He said, no, why? I said, I'll take the job. He said, what do you mean? I said, I haven't had a paycheck for 10 months. You know, I'm just trying to build this coffee roasting business and I need an income. I don't care what it pays. I'll take the job. And so he says, okay, I'll take that into consideration. You know, thanks, click. So for the next 14 days, or, you know, 10 business days, 14 days, I called him at 8 a.m. Seattle time every morning. Say, hey, Joe, this is Mike. I'm ready to start. And finally on, you know, the 14th day, he said, all right, look, come on up to Seattle. We'll interview you. I ended up getting hired. And so from 2001 to 2006, I sold espresso machines for La Marzocco. And I always tell people that's what I consider my coffee MBA. So I was in what was the coffee capital of the world. I mean, Seattle was definitely leading the charge on specialty coffee and particularly espresso. And then I'm learning from, you know, Kent Bakke, who was the CEO, literally opened the first espresso cart in Seattle, like back in the, you know, late 60s or something like that. So I'm learning from all these espresso pioneers, these really seasoned coffee people. And it was amazing. And then I'm building my business, my roasting business, you know, which is a weekend gig. And then it kind of turns into a night and weekend gig. And then it's like, well, you know, I was a one-man show. So I'm roasting coffee, I'm packaging coffee, I'm delivering coffee. Then it's like, well, instead of selling espresso machines on Wednesday, I'm going to go deliver coffee. And so, you know, I wasn't really doing either job 100%. And so I finally got to the point where I was able to quit my full-time job and then go into coffee roasting full-time.
Ooh. What was kind of the inflection point there? Like how did you know that it was time to make that leap? Because I know that that's a a quasi similar story for a lot of other entrepreneurs out there. Those that are kind of like, I've got something on the side, I'm starting to kind of build it up, and then it kind of hits this tipping point where you can't really do both things 100%.
Yep.
How would you kind of describe that transition moment for you, and what ultimately led it to kind of making that tip of now's the time to kind of make that transition?
Simple answer, money. So every year, in December, I would rant about, oh, all I want to do is, own my own business and not work for anybody else. And my wife is like, whatever, you need to keep a paycheck coming in. And she had taken over the finances a couple years prior, like maybe in 2004. And she's like, you need to keep your job, you need to keep your job. And then, I'm in my December rant in 2006, and she's looking at the finances and she goes, I think you should quit your job. And that was it. I was like, of course, I was scared when she said that. She called my bluff. Yeah. I was like, huh? What?
Oh, I love that so much. All right, so keep us on this path. So you make the transition. Now you're into business full time for yourself, continuing to grow. Kind of how soon was it until kind of you started looking at making a couple new hires and kind of start to expand beyond just a one man show? Kind of what was that transition like? Because I imagine that's not the role that you're in today, and things have shifted a little bit. So kind of walk us through maybe kind of those early parts of learning how to actually build and run a business.
Um, I don't remember the year. I remember, all the steps along the way. I don't remember what years they were exactly. I remember moving all the coffee roasting equipment out of my garage and into our first warehouse, which I thought was like a huge milestone. I remember hiring my first employee. Um, and then, a couple after that. And then I remember relocating the business from Houston to Austin. But it was definitely, look, I was really fortunate timing wise. Specialty coffee in Texas was starting to get traction. And
Hmm.
it was all happening in Austin, right? So Austin's a big college town. So, all the bougie coffee houses were starting to pop up here, which is one of the reasons we relocated the business here. And we were the only specialty coffee roaster in the whole state of Texas. So when somebody wanted to open what they
Wow.
call the third wave coffee shop, they would either go to, there was a company in Portland, a company in Chicago, a company in North Carolina, or if they wanted to be local, they would stick with us. Um, Fortunately for me, there's that don't mess with Texas mentality, or I'm sorry, keep Austin weird mentality, which is buy local and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, every third wave coffee shop that opened up, they ended up using our coffee. And so all of a sudden our brand, which I didn't even know what a brand was when we started the business, our brand is, in every great coffee shop in the city. And we got a lot of really good recognition and, then started moving into grocery and, all that sort of stuff.
I love that. So fast forward through today. What does the role look like today? How would you describe kind of what you do for the business as the business sits today?
Well, my role is right now at this very moment is very similar to what it was in the early days. Um, and that's only because I just lost my production manager at the cold brew facility. So now I'm running the cold brew facility. Um, so all day yesterday, I was canning cold brew. Today I was cleaning and sanitizing vessels and stuff like that. So I'm getting my hands dirty. However, um, you know, being the leader of the company, I also have to make sure that I'm talking with my sales manager and I'm talking with my roasting production manager and fixing equipment when it breaks and um, just talking financials with Rochelle, with my wife, who's our CFO. I was talking financials with her this morning and about raising prices and all these things. So it's um, yes, the role has changed and morphed, but there's a lot of what I used to do that's still in my day-to-day role.
That's fantastic. I appreciate you kind of walking through that. Before, because I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, the coffee that you produce and, talk a little bit about, cold brew and nitro and all that kind of stuff as you mentioned earlier. But before we kind of get off the topic of the journey that you've been on, as you kind of look back over, the last few decades, um, are there any like moments that stand out? Either they were, roadblocks or hurdles in the business that you really had to kind of overcome to ensure that the business continued to move forward, or, if it's easier to think through, like one big lesson or like misstep that you made in business that was like a big learning thing that helped you grow into the business leader that you are today. But kind of one of those little wisdom nuggets or stories for the audience on like, there's always something that comes up and it's part of that learning process within business.
Yeah, there's definitely not one learning moment. I mean, it's been a chain of learning moments for sure. Um, the notable things, like the big milestones that I remember, are, the first time we did $1 million in revenue in a year. Like that was huge, huge, huge. So that was a really good time. Um, you know, there's a massive difference, and people have told me this, and then, I've experienced it, and I'm telling other people. There's a huge difference between, starting a business, growing a business, and scaling a business. They are all, I mean, not even in the same stratosphere. Um, and look, I'm not an MBA, I'm a college dropout. So, I have no idea what scaling a business takes, but, trial by fire. So I'm learning that for sure.
Oh, that is a really good kind of, piece of wisdom, especially for those that are kind of in the earlier phases of business and maybe in that starting phase and recognizing that, yeah, it is a little bit different as you kind of get to these different phases of kind of the business maturity and growth cycle and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a little bit about kind of what makes the business so special and all of that. And, I'd love to hear a little bit more about, the cold brew side of the business and kind of some of the, I don't know, innovations and such that y'all have kind of come across there. But kind of take us through kind of what that looks like and what really has set y'all apart from, some of the others out in the marketplace today.
At the beginning, it was the quality of our product, right? And that was easily quantifiable. Now, I think high quality in the coffee world is kind of the barrier of entry. If you don't have high quality coffee, like you're not going to survive, more than 6 months. Um, you know, I guess another thing that makes us different is we're first to market with a lot of different things, right? We're the first specialty coffee roaster in Texas, and we're the first people to make Nitro Cold Brew and put it in kegs. And in 2011, in 2014, we were the first people in the world to can it, which sounds awesome and sexy. And being first really fuels the ego. But the reality is, like, particularly with cold brew, we started canning it. Everybody loved it, and it made a lot of sense, but there was no category for Nitro Cold Brew. It didn't exist. So the grocery stores were like, we love this product. We want to sell this product, but we have nowhere to put it. So they were putting in the beer aisle. And then
Mm.
people would grab a 6 pack of our coffee, take it home thinking it was beer, drink it, and be like, what the hell? So that was a huge challenge. So we pioneered by being first to market. And then we built a category with our brand. But then there's always the old adage that, pioneers get all the arrows and settlers get all the land. And so what happened is, after we built the category, companies that were much larger than us had much more marketing dollars invested, much more manufacturing capacity, things like that. They're the ones that took all the shelf space.
Mm.
So, you know, being first, I mean, there's a lot of great stuff, around being first, but it doesn't guarantee success. That's for sure.
That's a really wise piece of kind of advice and understanding. That's really cool. So, where do you see the business going? As you look, forward for the next, say, 3 to 5 years. How do you see the business growing? Kind of what are you excited about? Maybe kind of how does your role continue to evolve as the business grows?
Yeah, look, man, if I'm, just getting totally naked with you, the deal is right now we're in a rebuilding phase. Um, we had a group, an equity firm come in and make a minority investment in the company in 2017. Part of the deal with that investment was we had to use their sales and marketing team, which all sounded great. The reality of the situation is that every dollar they put in, they took out in salary and didn't grow the business.
Mm,
So we went from being always profitable to, you have to spend money to make money. That was their mantra, to losing money every month consecutively for 5 years in a row. And then finally, we just had to pull the ripcord and say, enough is enough. We have to renegotiate this contract. It's not working. So we're kind of back at square one. The company is now profitable again. And even though my wife and I were always still in charge, I made the mistake of putting my faith and what's the word I'm looking for? Basically putting my faith in someone else instead of relying on myself. So shame on me. I'm not blaming them. I made the decision. So yeah, I mean, look, I'm optimistic and excited that we're now profitable again, month after month after month. And, it's almost, now that I'm back getting my hands dirty and that sort of stuff, it's kind of almost like I'm, back to where I was 25 years ago. Just I'm, 25 years older now. So I feel like what we did 25 years ago, I'll be able to do. Man, I'm sorry about that. Um, I'll be able to do that same type of thing, but I'll be able to do it a whole lot faster this time.
that's fantastic. It's really fun to kind of hear some of those stories because it's that's the reality of going through some different scenarios and things in real life business and to kind of hear that sometimes those types of investments and partnerships and things like that work out fantastically. Other times not so much. Other times it's kind of a wash in terms of the
Yeah,
environment and but yeah, I mean, it sometimes you don't hear the full story, so I appreciate kind of hearing real perspective on kind of how that's kind of gone and things like that. So,
I'm glad you're
um,
sharing it because look, here's the deal. Everybody likes to share the super sexy story of, yeah, we went from, 5 million to 100 million and, I cashed out and I bought this house in Malibu. And, everybody loves that story because it's the American dream, right? It's every entrepreneur's dream. But man, I'm involved with a group of veteran entrepreneurs, an organization called Bunker Labs here in Austin. And my story is definitely not the exception. More people are in the same position that I'm in than there are people who hit a home run when they take an investment from somebody. Guaranteed. I try and tell people that all the time. I would have slowed down and done things a lot different if I could go back and do them, in 2017, if I go back and do it again.
yeah, that's such a key kind of component that you're right. This isn't the exception, right? The reality of like while the stories aren't always told, most businesses that I've come across and had conversations with have probably multiple moments in their history where it's like, yeah, like business went down by like half and
Yeah.
we had to figure out how to like rebuild. And, it wasn't always positive and we got to this, amazing exit and things like that. It's like, no, sometimes like it just things happen
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff. And, that's just kind of part of the journey. And why I love, this forum so much because, especially for the audience that's watching this, and we always encourage connections, things like that, because business ownership can be a lonely road, and being able to connect with others that kind of understand that. So yeah, again, I just appreciate the transparency and kind of openness to share some of that there. So
Sure.
Well, I know we've covered a tremendous amount of ground kind of in the conversation. I want to be respectful of the time that we have together today, and I've got a few kind of rapid fire questions that I love to kind of throw out there, get some kind of wisdom nuggets for the audience. So we'll go through those here. The first one, when you look at kind of your journey through building this business and kind of anything that came before, in just a couple of words, how would you describe or what would you say is kind of your key to success?
Um, Discipline and just never giving up. My dad used to always tell me that I was too stubborn to quit and too lazy to start over. So
I really
I,
like that.
I like to phrase it a little bit different than that, but there's probably some truth in it.
Oh, I had not heard it that way. So that's kind of that's a fun iteration of that. How about advice? If you were to give advice to other entrepreneurs or business owners out there today, and you could leave them with just one piece of advice today, what would you want to leave them with?
Um, don't make business decisions based on what your competitors or peers in the industry think. So I spent, especially from a marketing perspective, it's one of those things that was like, well, if we're going to run an ad campaign, we can't use the word grind or Joe or something like that because all my peers and competitors will make fun of me for using, silly cliches like that. But the reality is none of my competitors buy product from me. As a matter of fact, they'd probably all like to see me fail miserably.
Mm,
And the consumer loves words like grind and Joe, and it resonates with them. And so make decisions based on your consumer, not your peers, and not what you think your peers are going to say. Who gives a shit what they say? That's the reality of the situation.
Whew, that is a good piece of advice. How about book recommendations or podcasts? I realize not everybody is a huge reader, but book or podcast that you've either read or listened to recently, something that kind of sticks out in your mind that you'd want to give as a recommendation. But what's one that you'd give to the audience today?
Um, oh gosh, I mean, I read lots of books. I've been kind of on a normally I read business books and biographies and stuff like that. But I've been on a more of reading old war stories and stuff right now. But I like Extreme Leadership by Jocko
Mm,
Willink. I think it's a great book. I think there's a lot of good things in there. Um, Traction, I think, is another good business book by Gino Wickman. Um, and then, from a motivational standpoint, I read both of David Goggins' books, Can't Hurt Me and
mm.
Never Finished. Or yeah, Never Finished. I think that was the other one. And those were both, I mean, that he's a totally different animal for sure. So when you talk about, never quitting, and pretty impressive.
Yeah, that is for sure. Those are phenomenal recommendations. I love that. We'll do one more rapid fire question. We'll kind of get into our final wrap up here. This one's just kind of fun. When you look at your business today, if you could choose just one area, and that's the key, you only get to choose one spot in the business where you can take a little bit of magic dust and you can sprinkle it all over that spot, and you'll wake up tomorrow, it's like 10 times better than it is today. Where would you choose to put that magic dust?
Leadership. Yeah. So I think leadership, and this is one of the things that I'm learning on my own and from other people when it comes to scaling the business. When you get to that point, the reality is you can't do everything on your own like you did when you were starting your business. And having good, effective leadership is actually absolutely paramount.
Hmm. I love that. So, for those that are in the audience and they want to connect with you, if they want to learn more about the amazing coffee and roasting and everything that y'all do, where can we point them for more information? Where can they go to learn more?
Everything for us is, Cuvée Coffee. So at Cuvée Coffee on all the socials, cuvecoffee.com is the website. And then same thing for me. Everything is Mike McKim. So at Mike McKim uh, on the socials. I don't have a website. And then my podcast is called Be Pause Podcast. And that's just at Be Pause Pod. BPOSPOD, then bpospod.com.
Beautiful. I'll make sure to put all of that in the video description, or as much as I can in the video description below. I know you're on LinkedIn and everything as well. It's
Yeah,
an area that we tend to share kind of this content afterwards. And I highly encourage everyone who's watching to just go click the link. It bare minimum, just say, send Mike a quick message, say, hey, saw you in the business spotlight. Great conversation. Just want to connect, all that kind of stuff. It's always good to make those connections. So, Mike, as we
absolutely.
wrap up, I've got one final question for you today, and that's simply, what is most inspiring to you today?
Um, hmm, most inspiring. Well, my wife right now, she's probably the most inspiring person in my life. Yeah, we've been through a rough patch, just family stuff. And she's my rock.
Hmm, I love that. Mike, I want to say thank you again for taking the time. This has been a genuine pleasure. I know that I could, probably chat your ear off for another, an hour and a half if we had the time. But I just want to say thank you again for taking the time and sharing a bit of your story and the growth of the business over time.
Sure, it's my pleasure. And thanks again for having me.